Critical thinking is actually, it's a selfie. I call it the academic selfie. It's the capacity to turn the lens around on yourself and notice your own bias as it kicks into gear, your capacity to recognize when you don't have enough information or expertise or education to evaluate an argument. It's the ability to identify your body's reactivity.
Welcome to the New World Normal podcast. I'm Debbie Harrell, your host, and twice a month I'm speaking with some amazing humans who are disrupting norms and working to create a more inclusive and holistic society. These people are using their sphere of influence, no matter how large or small, to positively impact the world around them. They'll be sharing their expertise as well as sharing stories of resiliency and hope. We'll be talking about the issues that are affecting us all, from the environment, human rights, social issues, criminal justice, and education. We'll talk about our healthcare systems, wellness, and food, from how it's cultivated and distributed to how it's prepared and consumed. Basically, we're going to talk about all the systems in our society that aren't necessarily working for the benefit of the many. We'll strategize and collaborate on how we as a collective can intentionally make better choices every day that will lead to a positive change in the world around us. Because in the end, it's up to us to solve these problems. There is no magic potion or magic wand. It is us and our daily choices and how we spend our time and how we invest our resources. Intrigued? Stick around and have a listen, and by all means, click like or subscribe on your favorite podcast source. Hello, welcome back to the New World Normal podcast. I'm Debbie, and today I'm talking to Julie Bogart. Julie is known for her common sense parenting and education advice. She's the author of the beloved book, The Brave Learner, which has brought joy and freedom to countless home educators. Her new book, Raising Critical Thinkers, offers parents a lifeline in navigating the complex digital world our children are now confronting. I knew I wanted to speak to Julie early on when I decided to start this podcast with the big shift moving to homeschooling. I knew her advice and expertise would be needed by so many. And then when she came out with her new book, Raising Critical Thinkers, I knew that the time was at hand because, hello, the world just needs more critical thinkers. So hold on to your hats. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Here we go.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for coming on, and welcome, Julie, to the New World Normal podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
You were actually one of the first people I thought of when I had the idea to do this podcast during the beginning of the pandemic, when everybody was having to embrace homeschooling on some level, whether it was traditional homeschooling or a traditional school at home.
Right.
What was that time like for you?
Oh, it was amazing. There were so many new people who were actually interested in homeschooling and not skeptical of it. I would say that homeschool's reputation went through a transformation because of the pandemic. The year before the pandemic, my book, The Brave Learner, had just come out, and I went on all these radio shows, and people treated me like an oddity, right? Like they were fascinated by homeschool and they wondered how we got socialized and how could I teach things on my own. A full year later, I was suddenly an authority on the subject, and everybody was like, what about socialization? I think homeschoolers must have figured that out and you could help us. And I was like, what is happening here? Suddenly we're like the cool kids on the block. So that was an amazing experience.
Yeah, I can say that timing is everything, right? The fact that your book came out right before all that happened.
Amazing. Yeah, a year before. And honestly, it's been such an amazing experience to get to know these parents, many who were sort of homeschool curious, but didn't quite have the courage to quit school. So when the pandemic hit and they had the lockdown everywhere, all these moms, especially, not as many dads, but so many moms were like, good, I've got a get out of jail free card. I can homeschool for 6 weeks, see if I like it without risking anything. And it led to a surprising number of people who have continued to homeschool, even like really high powered women with careers who never thought they could do both, suddenly discovered they could. It was really cool.
That's awesome, because I definitely think that the pandemic shined a bright light on the lack in our public school system, our traditional school system, you know?
Yeah. One of the things parents told me, in fact, is that they were watching the virtual learning on the screen and they were sort of mortified at how tedious things were, how what their kids already knew was being covered again. And it's not to put any blame on teachers. Those conditions were appalling. I can't imagine anyone being successful under those conditions. But I think parents were not used to actually being sort of a fly on the wall of what their kids were learning. They just trust the school to take care of it. And they did not experience sort of the curiosity that would facilitate better learning. And so, what I've discovered is that those parents who started participating in the education of their kids loved it. They were like, wow, actually, I like knowing what's going on with my kids. So even the ones who put their kids back in school seem to have a much more hands-on attitude than they did before. And I think that's a net win for all students.
I was just going to say, well, that's a win for the kids either way,
Yep.
That's great. I love hearing that. And I wanted to touch on not to blame the teachers because I couldn't agree more. We try and fit them in these little boxes, them and the kids.
Right.
With such rigid structures and that's just not how people learn or people work.
No. And in fact, I grew up in a really interesting time. I was a child in the late 60s and 1970s when there was this huge revolution in education. It was really fostered, I think, by the flower power movement, but there was just a lot of innovation around learning. And my public school education was fantastic. Fantastic. I had teachers who were experimenting with so many different ways of delivering lessons. I even share some of them in my book, The Brave Learner, because I'm about learning. I don't care where you do it. You can do it at a school, you can do it at home, you can do it in a tutorial. But what really matters is whether or not what the child is receiving sticks, and not sticks just to pass a test, but because it's personally valuable and meaningful. And for me, that's the measurement we want to use with learning. So in the 1970s, I had teachers, for instance, in my 7th grade, the social studies department got together and decided to have a Renaissance fair at the end of the school year. So we built up for the whole year, learning about the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and all the various factors. And then one day for the entire school day, we missed all our other classes and we held this huge Renaissance fair on campus, and everyone in the whole 7th grade participated. To me, that was so memorable.
That sounds like so much fun too.
Oh, it was a blast. And of course, I'm not a very project-y oriented person. So you had to decide, do you want to be a candlestick maker? Do you want to be a person who is, it was the 1970s. So we had people who were doing leather working and we had people doing paint on tattoos. Well, I was a gymnast. So my friend and I decided that we would be jesters and we would perform in order to get like our ale or whatever. But we learned very quickly that entertainment was not as lucrative in the Middle Ages as actually having a good to sell. These were just valuable little lessons. I had another social studies teacher who was showing us all about Inca life. And so one day we came in and she had us make pottery and we were like following the patterns of whatever that model was. And then we took those pots and had them fired. And then we came back the next day, beautiful clay pots, and there's a hammer sitting next to each of our pots. And she says, I need you to smash what you just made. And we're like, why? She's like, I just need you to do it. So we just go to town, smash them into bits. She gets an individual shoebox, sweeps each of the pots into the box. We don't know why. The next day we come back. She walks us out to a field. My school was in Malibu Canyon. So we're like out in this open stretch of land. And she gives us shovels and divides us into groups and tells us to go on an archaeological dig for our pots. And obviously my group, we didn't find ours right away. So I started crying because I was that kind of kid. And she's like, Julie, you're having the most authentic experience. Nobody else just digs. She forgot where ours were. So we had to dig more. She's like, but this is how it is. You don't really know where to dig. And so we're like digging and digging. So when we finally got ours, we were so excited. We come back to the classroom. She has us glue them back together and create a museum of all of our artifacts with the labels after going on an archaeological dig. So like the 1970s, man, great education. Like these teachers felt free.
I was just going to say they had freedom to be a little more creative.
Yeah, they didn't have end of the year exams,
And again, that's a win for the kids because you learned in an authentic, meaningful way to you and had fun while you were doing it.
That's right. And hands-on, immersive, surprising, mysterious, risky. These are the things that catalyze learning, not rote repetition, but literally surprise, mystery, risk, and adventure. Those are the keys. So if teachers had some freedom, I saw a class online where they were talking about teaching kids to write a 10-step paragraph on how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which is a tried and true writing exercise that bores everyone to tears. But anyway, they decided to make the sandwiches while they were writing it. So that helps a little bit, but they're in a classroom. The kids weren't allowed to use plastic knives. So they're sitting there using plastic forks to try and cut the sandwich in half. And I was like, what on earth is happening here? Like this, a net loss for learning.
There are some lessons to be learned there other than the writing and the peanut butter and jelly making, because a plastic knife, of course we can't use those in school.
Right. So that's where we've gotten to, right? Here I had a hammer and a shovel and like a ceramics tool and paintbrushes to use. And then fast forward 50 years and nope, none of those are allowed to be touched by children.
You can only use a spork.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, yeah. I would have to say that I raised my kids in traditional public school because I was a single mom and that seemed like the only choice. Looking back now, I'm like, I'm sure if there were a need or a desire on any of our parts, I probably could have made something work. But to look back and think of how different it could have been and seeing parents now making the choice to be able to teach their children in that creative way where the kids are getting to explore what they're curious about, which I think is so huge. Like give a kid like what topic lights them up and give them the opportunity to explore it. What kind of different leaders that's going to create when they have that freedom to go down a different path.
Right. That's exactly right. And honestly, even if you have your kids in school, you can live this way as a parent. My mother did. She was just remarkable. She did projects with us. She took us to the ballet. She took us to listen to music. She was very supportive of me developing as a writer in my free time, not just for schoolwork. I think if parents recognize that their role in education is vital to the child, so many amazing fruits can result. And that is one of the great benefits of the pandemic. I think more parents discovered that they have a vital role in education and that education is not about completing homework. It's actually about learning. I was talking to this one woman who works in an organization that supports teaching kids with learning challenges, ADD, ADHD. So her kids were in school and she was off doing this other work to help other students every day. Pandemic came, she had to stay home. And she said that she suddenly realized how many hours a day had been lost just in the commute and doing her morning exercise. So she lived in New Jersey, had to commute to Manhattan. She was working out at 5 a.m. every day. Like a lot of hours got lost that would have been meaningful just for conversation. And so during the pandemic, she and her kids started a garden. They were reading. She wasn't having to work out away from home. She was using her weights at home, still getting her 8 hours in of work, but actually all around those edges, being able to hang out with her kids. And so she did put them back in school, but she turned her life into a remote worker just so that she would have more time with her kids before and after school when they got back. That's the kind of thing that's happening. Parents are recognizing that we're all on this just relentless treadmill and we're all sick of COVID. I mean, there's no question about that. We're sick of this life, but like, I haven't met anyone who wants to go back to the way it was either.
That's exactly why this whole idea developed, is when people were so worried about what the new normal was going to be. And, oh my gosh, it's going to be terrible and awful. And I kept thinking, was the old normal really that great?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We were so used to it. We didn't even know what the toll it was taking actually was.
That treadmill and trying to fit ourselves in the little boxes of corporate needs or institutional needs. Like, yeah, it's not working for the humanity in us.
Did you see that Denmark just changed their work week to 4 days?
That's amazing.
I know. I loved it. I was like, wow, I have a company. Maybe I need to do that. Like it was inspiring.
I've met quite a few entrepreneurs who have their teams work 4-day work weeks, and that is definitely a goal of mine for sure.
It's beautiful.
And I feel like it's really possible.
I mean, the question mark for me is, will I just work 12-hour days? Like, I think it's worth experimenting with because I already work on hours that are beyond the workday. I work on weekends. I work while I'm in the shower. I mean, when you're like it's sort of a business owner or you're sort of responsible for your own revenue, it's not a paycheck. There is sort of like the never ending. So I actually have to discipline myself to really take time away, like turn off the phone or leave the house and not bring my phone with me. Like those are hard for me. And to turn down the brain too, to not let the brain work all the time. It's a big challenge for Americans, I think.
Yes, it's definitely a little self-care muscle that we all need to exercise. And I imagine it's different too when you're working for yourself, like you said, responsible for your own revenue, but also you're working on something that lights you up and it's a passion of yours and you have a mission and you're really excited to help people. I want to bring us around to what really prompted me to reach out to you was your new book.
Thank you. Yes.
And can you tell me the title of it?
Yeah. Raising Critical Thinkers, a
Hello.
parent's guide. Yeah. It's a parent's guide to growing wise kids in the digital age.
And how do we teach adults to be critical thinkers too?
Well, so
does the book translate for adult learners too?
Well, let me just tell you, the tricky part of writing this book is that you cannot raise a critical thinker unless you understand what critical thinking is. And similar to how adults feel about driving, they all think they're good at critical thinking, just like they all think they're great drivers. I mean, that's just like a universal. But the truth of the matter is that most of us have a definition of critical thinking in our minds that is about the way we evaluate things that are external to us. So information that comes to us, the other guy's opinion, that cable news. And we feel like we're good critical thinkers because we're good at being critical of all of those things, right? I can find the flaws and I can say why those people are washed up and crazy and not smart. But that isn't what critical thinking is. Critical thinking is actually it's a selfie. I call it the academic selfie. It's the capacity to turn the lens around on yourself and notice your own bias as it kicks into gear, your capacity to recognize when you don't have enough information or expertise or education to evaluate an argument. It's the ability to identify your body's reactivity. For instance, there are times when I see a Facebook post and a friend from high school shares an article. And before I've even started reading the article, just by knowing the title or the news source, I've already decided what I think about it. Haven't even started reading. I've already decided whether I agree with it or disagree. I often tell parents, when you're about to read something, ask yourself, what do I hope will be true? That reveals your bias right away. That is the start of critical thinking. If when I start reading a book or an article, my first thought is, I hope that this guy's wrong, I can't read it critically. I'm already controlling the reading. Or I hope this is right so I can prove to my friend that I have the facts and they don't. These are the pieces of critical thinking that we want our kids to be in touch with. But until adults have some foundational understanding of how this operates in them, they'll find it difficult to guide them. So my book is really written to both of those people, the adult who's doing the reading and the parent of the child. It's the same person, but it's two levels.
Such a relatable example too, because we have all had that experience scrolling through Facebook and we see a friend has posted something and we're like, oh boy, what are they posting now?
Yes. And we do it all the time. It doesn't matter what the information is. You could be sitting with your husband watching the Olympics and he makes some comment and it triggers something in you and you can't figure out what it is. I'll give you a good example for me. Occasionally, when I'm with my dad or my brother or a male who's watching the Olympics, they might make a dismissive comment about female sports. And I immediately feel defensive because I am a female. I was an athlete. It bugs me that women don't get the same level of sort of admiration from men. I follow male sports. I'm a huge sports fan of hockey and football and baseball, male sports. Why are men so easily dismissive of female sports? So then instead of being curious and kind of drilling down to all the nuances that created that opinion, I just dive into why they're wrong. And we get no further. That person never has a new way of thinking about women in sports, and they have no way of understanding where I'm coming from. And it becomes a conflict of personalities rather than actually an investigation of the cultural factors, the social factors, the economics, the way that our culture thinks about women. And that conversation could be had with anyone. You don't even have to agree to have that conversation. So that's the difference.
That is that communicating to understand rather than to just to reply, and that curiosity of trying to really understand. Now, the over analytical person in me, like, because I'm like, ooh, that could take me forever to get through a conversation, all those nuances. But it's true. We are walking through our days in all capacity with these biases, and it's affecting everything. So to get more in touch with them and just recognize them is a huge first step.
And it really is enough. Like, you don't have to overcome them. If you admit your bias, if you say, look, I think women in sports are great, and I think it's really important for us to support it, no matter what you say. Okay, but now let's hear what you have to say. I think a lot of times we think that the way to deal with bias is to pretend to be neutral, but we're not neutral. So it's better to actually own the ground you stand on and then just allow the new information to ride sidecar for a little while. Just let it live alongside. Let the new information that sort of shoots a hole in your theory just be in the same room with you. But most of the time, we're looking for sort of like the final verdict, right? The one right answer we can all agree on, instead of recognizing that some of these issues, all issues, are so much more complex than what we allow them to be in our minds.
And that is an excellent point. I was just going to say that I feel like so many people are uncomfortable in that gray area. They want the black or white answer, like yes or no, right or wrong. And that doesn't really apply in most cases or all cases.
Yes, I think the problem is, and I write about this in the book, I think traditional schooling has trained us to believe there is one right answer that we will all agree on because of testing. So you're in a classroom with 30 kids, your teacher designs a test, you all take the same test, and there is only one answer key. There's no room for an individual to say, when I read the question, I thought this is what you meant. That's not helpful. You actually, either it's answer A or it's not answer A. There isn't sort of an opportunity for you to muse that in a classroom of 30 people, you might actually come up with a variety of takes on the same question. And because of that, when social media came along, it was like it just plugged us right back into our test-taking mentality. We all thought if we could just cite one authority and a fact, what we considered a fact, everyone would just fall in line and agree that that was the truth. We've been trained in our educations for 18 years to think that way, So what I usually think now is the only way to back off of that is to start to recognize that we're all bringing different authoritative sources. They're the authorities in my life. Doesn't mean that everybody agrees with my authority. And so if that's the case, we want to actually understand the contextual factors that create that view that the person holds so sacred, because they're as loyal to their own thoughts as you are to yours. And until we can appreciate the journey they took to arrive at that point of view, we can't really have a conversation.
And to give them the consideration that they have had a journey different from ours.
Well, and they have.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's absolutely the facts. You're right about that. Even siblings in the same family have different journeys. They see their parents differently. They remember the same event differently. One of my favorite examples of that is the book by Tara Westover called Educated. Did you ever get a chance to read that book?
No.
It's a memoir of a girl who grew up in a fundamentalist Mormon family without any schooling. And so it's filled with child abuse. I mean, it's just really a tough read. But throughout the book, she credits her siblings as remembering the same events differently than her. She'll say, well, this is how I remember it. Here's how my older brother remembers it. Here's what my younger brother says. And you're sort of left with, wow.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's such a good, I love that she did that because it's such a good example of how we craft a narrative from raw material. The raw material is the same, but each person is going to tell a different story with that same data.
Right. Our perceptions really do influence and shape our memories.
Absolutely.
And they can really distort them. Also, I loved the story you shared at the introduction of the book, the critical thinking book, about finding the love letter from your grandfather to your grandmother.
Yes. So my grandparents were living in California. They had been in Illinois until some late date. And they moved out, and my grandmother started showing signs of dementia and her mind started to deteriorate. But my grandfather was really worried about her losing all their precious memories. So he took it on himself to write her a weekly letter, longhand, on stationery, and put it in envelopes.
So
and after
beautiful.
So beautiful. And no one knew he had done this. And so after he died, we were going through his things and we found this box of these letters. And the first one I pulled out literally said to my grandmother, remember the first time I made love to you on the little hilltop. And my grandparents were die-hard Catholics. And I immediately just started laughing. And I yelled to my two aunts, two of their daughters, get a load of this, Grammy and Papa had sex before they were married, right? So I read this aloud to them. And my younger aunt, who's only 6 years older than me, grew up during the hippie era. She's like, and they lectured me about my virginity before I got married. But my older aunt was a former nun, and she was 17 years older than my younger aunt. And she says, that can't be what it means. There's no way they had sex. So we got in this big textual interpretation argument. Now, the thing is, this letter was written in 1997, but it referenced an experience from the 1930s. And in the 1930s, the words make love, like you see in It's a Wonderful Life, just means putting the moves on, really pressing your case for, I want you to be my woman. But in 1997, make love meant having sex. So the question I have had ever since was my grandfather using the idiom of the 1930s to remind his wife's confused mind of a time that was really a lovely time in her life, using the language that her mind would recognize? Or was he just writing a late in life confession, knowing that she couldn't understand it and none of us would know about it, right? So which was it? And we don't know.
Right.
We have to live with the ambiguity of not knowing.
And that was part of the point. One of the chapters doesn't always lead to an airtight conclusion.
That's right. Critical thinking does not mean you will have an airtight final conclusion. In fact, all textual criticism is for a moment. It's a vapor. It lasts as long as the person says the words. And the next year, next month, sometimes the next day, another person will come along and they will bring a fresh understanding built from their current context as it fuses with the context of the original. And there's no escape from that.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's what people's unease with that idea is the change. Everything's changing so rapidly. They just want to hold on to one thing, no, this is the truth and it's always going to be the truth. Whereas things change so quickly with everything in our lives. Technology is changing, science is changing because they're making new innovations and new discoveries.
That's right.
And our ideas are changing and our ways of living. I'm everything is changing. So maybe that's why people hold so tightly to their ideas and their opinions. If you're enjoying this conversation, you'll love the discussions happening in the New World Normal community, where we meet regularly to discuss personal growth and social issues, because we know when we do our work, we're better able to navigate this ever-changing world. Be sure to follow the link in the show notes for more information.
So what I think is really interesting would be to compare something like values as opposed to doctrines. So a lot of times to protect a value, we adopt a doctrine and we give it an absolute. So we might say something like, do not steal. Do not steal is an absolute. We've agreed as society that you should not steal. But we also know tons of people who steal. They download things that are not theirs to download. They share songs with their friend that they don't own. They're watching movies online that they have no right to. So, what is that fine line? How are we actually navigating the belief against this doctrine, against our actual values? And we're making that calculus all the time. And I think that is why it's really important to be a critical thinker, is to recognize that we do use the language of gray areas, but for people who are strong in their morals, that feels like postmodernism and relativism. What I like to say, rather than a gray area, is to recognize the complexity in your own belief system, to recognize that I have no problem killing an ant. But, there are Buddhists who do. Mm-hmm. They would consider that not okay. I have put a dog to sleep because the dog was cancer ridden. When I lived in Morocco, I had a very sick cat and I took it into the vet to put it to sleep. The Quran does not permit you to kill your own animals. That is in God's hands. So he would not do it.
Oh, wow.
These are complexities within a certain value. What was my value? My value was, well, kill the ant. He's inconvenient to me. But I would never kill a dog who's inconvenient to me. I would only kill a dog if the dog had cancer. But someone with another moral, ethical standard says, actually, you don't have the right to take life. So they take it up a whole other notch. So when you think about these things, I think it's valuable to notice that even in your own binary thinking, you have complexity. And so do most people.
So my over analytical brain is fine. It's just,
it's an asset to you. It can be uncomfortable. You know how people always say the only thing that it doesn't change is change, right? Like they make these kinds of glib remarks. But really, I think what I hope kids come away with, and even adults from this book, is a greater sense of peace, that they get to make these calls and that it's okay for them to change, and that today's confidence is good. Enjoy today's confidence.
Yeah.
Like you can have confidence today. You just don't need to declare it for all people for all time in order to enjoy the value it gives you today.
That's a huge point. And the fact that being comfortable with changing your mind, changing your opinion, especially like, because they talk about the studies, like even when people are presented with new information counter to their belief, they're still resistant to changing their opinion, which is mind-boggling, but I'm sure that I've encountered it too. Like, nope, sorry.
We all are so loyal to our communities that if a piece of information comes that will cause us to feel that we are no longer welcome members of our communities, we will deny the facts to stay safe. So whether that community is just your marriage partner, or it's your larger family, or it's your religious faith community, or it's the school that you cheer for at football games, right? Like no matter what the community is, even if you've become a huge fan of a talk radio show, you are joining the community of people who are fans of that person. It's why when our icons do something that upsets us, it's so discouraging because it's ruining the community that supported that fandom, right? So when we're a member of the Michael Jackson fan club, and then we find out that he's molested children, we're confronted with something that's going to take away the joy we had in being a member of this fan group and all the benefits it gave us. So when that first came out, all these fans were like, that can't be true. They couldn't confront the information because it was going to rob them of an identity that they really valued. And that's the hard part. The more entrenched that identity is, the harder it is to face truths that contradict it.
I love that you put it in that terms of community and being part of a community, because we are hardwired to be in community. And
yes.
And our instincts believe it's for our survival. So it's hardwired.
That's right.
We want to remain in that community. So that makes a lot of sense.
And even the iconoclast, because there are always these people who say to me, I'm an independent thinker. That's the community they're in. They're all over Reddit and they're all the same.
All those independent thinkers think the same. That's awesome. Ooh, one of the lines I picked out of the excerpt that I was reading through last night: to nurture passionate learners with thoughtful minds and empathetic hearts.
Mm,
Right? That's so good,
yeah.
Julie. Those are your words.
Thank you.
And that just leads me back to like what a wonderful world it will be when I know the last several years has been a roller coaster to say the least. And so many times I've turned to think, oh, this younger generation is going to have to save us because it is a mess. And we're seeing little bits of it come to fruition as they're getting older and how things are shifting. But thinking of this book and how it might impact another generation, it's heartwarming and exciting and hopeful.
Thank you. You know, every generation hopes the next generation will save us. And we do. We each generation saves us a little and then introduces, a huge number of problems too. I was going to use language I shouldn't use on a radio show. If you look back to previous eras, I was thinking the other day about the Middle Ages. I think I watched a movie that was about the Middle Ages recently, and I was thinking of how hard life looked to me. Just, the chamber pots and the same heavy clothing every day and hauling water to and from the castle. Like it just seemed so absurd, but it was the most modern moment in history even then. And there were major problems that had to be overturned. And they were by revolutions that killed thousands and millions of people at various junctures in history. And so today feels terrible because we're living it. We have the visceral experience, but every era has just staggering moments to overturn. I mean, we thought this pandemic was hard. We did not live through the bubonic plague before modern medicine, and somehow humankind survived it. We've had all kinds of historical, moments that we've overcome, like the slave trade. Atlantic slave trade is gone. I mean, there's sex slavery, there's other kinds, I am well aware, in capitalism. But my point is, we've faced really big odds before. And we always look forward to the next generation benefiting. I always look at the Enlightenment as the legacy that we're still kind of living out. And I really loved that period. I look back on it with a lot of fondness as an educator because there was a thoughtfulness and a depth of analysis that was the fruition of the printing press era. It was before modern visual communication. Media has really changed how we learn dramatically. And so when I think of that era, I feel like they laid the foundation for what we have today. And what I think will be exciting is to see how this brand new sort of trench of literature that's coming through visual media is going to be sort of the renaissance of the technological age. We're really in the dark ages. I never wanted to live in the dark ages, but I am. We are. So it will be amazing to see what they do with this. I'm fundamentally a technological optimist. So I think the problems technology creates, technology will solve. Fingers crossed I'm right. I might be wrong.
I'm hopeful. I'm with you also. I feel like we have the capabilities of fixing our problems. It's whether the powers that be are going to get out of the way to let us innovate.
Or if it will take some kind of overhaul of the system. And of course, that's what we're always asking that question. What I love about human beings is they're pretty much relentless, critical people. They're just judging machines. And while it's uncomfortable interpersonally with your favorite people, it is what leads to innovation, revolution, and breakthroughs in philosophical thought. So if we can sort of have tolerance for that uncle at Thanksgiving who's kind of spouting a bunch of stuff and actually hear what the complaint is pointing to, that's actually the foundation for how we bring transformation. Like actually paying attention. Oh, what is this pointing to? What do people keep complaining about over and over? Like right now in the digital space, both the left and the right are obsessed with this tool called social media. How do we use it? What does it do? How is it changing our minds? And I was thinking the other day, it feels like everyone feels that way. So is it having as bad an influence as we think it is? Because literally everyone thinks it's a problem. So that's a good sign to me.
I would go back and say if we all agreed on everything, we would never get anywhere. Like we would never do anything new. We would just keep doing the same things. So the disagreement does help us innovate. And as far as the social media, it cracks me up about how they're both attacking how terrible it is, yet they're both still on it.
Oh, yeah.
And the censorship of the social media censoring this post. Okay, I've seen that post 100 times today, number one. Not just,
oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So completely true.
So I don't think it's being censored. Meanwhile, you're in a camp that is wanting to censor and ban and actually burn books. Like, how are we in the year 2020 still burning 2022? Lost a couple of years there.
Hey, I feel like it's just a very long, slow 2020. That's just all we live in anymore. We're never moving forward.
We're just going to be stuck like a Groundhog's Day.
We're just going to be there forever. That's it. But I agree with you. Like, one of the funny things is back in the 30s, when they were burning books, they were literally eliminating things. But with digital, the digital half-life is a billion years, right? Like, these things are not going anywhere. The second you ban a book, it's going to be uploaded as a PDF. You can download illegally somewhere and justify stealing. So there you go. We've just come full circle.
Full circle. I love those full circle moments. Oh, this has been awesome. Yay.
Yeah.
I'm glad I finally reached out and made this happen, because this has been a great conversation.
It has. It's been very loose, very fun. I think we covered topics I have not even spoken about yet. So good job. Good job.
I love a good tangent. I was going to ask you one question. It's funny, when I started this process, my zinger question, my one little gimmick question was, what would you normalize in our society? But after I spoke to a few people, one of which was I think he was an anthropologist in Australia, and we were talking about the danger of normalizing things. And now that really creates exclusivity, like you're normal or you're not normal. So then I switched it up to, we're disrupting norms. We are questioning norms. And so I will spin the question to be, if you could disrupt one norm in our society, in our culture, what norm would you want to disrupt?
It's the one I keep trying to disrupt in my own life, and that is endless scrolling rather than reading an actual physical book. The biggest learning, or the biggest lesson I got doing research into my book, was that I was wrong about what the internet is doing to our brains. You can probably guess, I was a big optimist. I really wanted to believe that reading online was the same as reading in a book. But what they're showing in the research is that those deep focus attention states that we've been cultivating for about 1,500 years on the scene of humankind since the printing press are at risk of being lost, because the way that we read online, particularly on our cell phones, puts us back into hyper focus attention states, which means always ever vigilant for the ping, the ding, the jingle, the red dot, just like the grunt of a warthog or the downtick of temperature used to alert us to danger in our more primal mode. The only way we could get to a point where we could do deep reading was to have monasteries, libraries, and universities in a culture that was essentially safe from harm. Today, we've reintroduced danger, but it's in the form of a Facebook insult or an Instagram post that we don't agree with. And so we're ever vigilant for this intruder into our mental space that is going to disrupt us. So what I discovered is similar to the advent of cars, which took away our need to walk anywhere. We've had to bring exercise as a deliberate choice into our lives. We have to work out with trainers, run for marathons, play a team sport, whatever we do to move our bodies as a response to this huge advantage of technology in transportation. Similarly, as the digital world takes off, it's important to carve out time every day where you're reading offline and your phone is literally in a different room, and you do it for 10 or 15 minutes, build up to 20, so that you retain a shapely brain, a brain that can have deep attention focus states. And for me, that is a daily challenge. Like, I would rather scroll. It feels easier.
It is definitely much easier, but that intentionally setting setting apart some time for yourself. Again, that goes back to that self-care muscle that we all need to exercise a little more.
Right.
And that's huge. I did for a while, and I've fallen off the train, leave my phone on my desk at night so that it's not in my bedroom with me. So it's not the first thing I grab first thing in the morning, but I definitely need to get back to that. And as you said too, the reading of the book, I've also heard that something happens with the turning of the pages, something neurologically. So I've been trying to retrain myself to read a book because I used to love to read, sit quiet and read. And just the focus, I don't know if it's because of the internet or because of, issues I'm going through personally. Like I just cannot focus just on the book. So what I have done, a little trick, little hack, if anybody else wants to join in, is I have the book and I listen. So then I'm getting the visual, because also my memory, I can remembering things where they were on the page.
That is exactly one of the reasons to read a physical book, because our visual memory is so much greater than any other version. And so what happens is exactly what you said. If you're reading on a Kindle, you can't remember where you read anything. One of the ways we store the data is, it was at the top of the page, a third of the way through the book, right on the right-hand side. And so you're exactly right about that. And the squirrel brain, that sort of hyper-focused, jumping around brain, is because of the way the web works. And it's been working on our brains now for several decades. So to go back, what I've noticed is, if I read a book chronologically, I was getting to the point where I wasn't even reading chronologically. I was like, okay, I'm just going to skip these 3 chapters. They look boring. I'll start with chapter 6. And I'm like missing the foreground of an argument, right? So during the writing of this book, I just made it this rule that every day at lunch, I would eat lunch and then I would read for like a half hour. And then it started to become something I really looked forward to because it was so different than everything else in my life. But it still takes me 7 minutes to calm down. It's like 7 minutes while I'm reading, I'm still thinking about what I used to be doing. So it very much is like running, right? Like if you are not a runner, that first time you get out there, you're going to walk a lot. You're not going to run. But over time, the running starts to take over and it actually starts to feel like something you look forward to, even if it's a little effort at the beginning. So I do recommend it.
I'm in.
And I'm still working on it.
I'm in. I think I'm going to start just trying to read.
Yeah.
Because I also have a stack of books that I'm like, I can't keep buying these books on Audible too. Like I've already purchased the book. Just this could get expensive. So
it's true.
Maybe it's time to take off the training wheels and try just to read, like, and give myself the grace of that 10-minute settling down period.
That's right. That squirreliness. The thing that they say in the research, and this comes from the book, The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains by Nicholas Carr. He says that they've shown that the phone can't just be off. It has to be in a different room. And political commentator Ezra Klein, when he was interviewing Nicholas Carr, he said, I actually had to buy a timer safe. He puts his phone in a timer safe so that he knows he cannot get it out. And this is a guy who reads a ton. I mean, the volume of stuff that he reads, but he has ADD and he's only 36, right? So he was raised with the internet. So he even has to trick himself further. Now, for me, as long as the phone's off and face down, I'm fine. But for kids, put it in a basket, stick it in a room where they can't see it. Everybody should read at the same time. So there's a community project going on. Make sure you've got cozy blankets, light a fire if it's winter, and just set a timer. Do it 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day.
I love the idea of doing it together as a family. Like that would just set the mood, the tone. Exactly. But also I wonder if energetically that calm, contemplative energy is feeding us in other ways. I like that.
It's like being in a library rather than trying to read while your friend is in the movie theater, right? So if you're trying to read and your kid is watching Lord of the Rings in the other room and you're hearing Gandalf and explosions, you're distracted. So by inviting everyone into this practice, you're actually recreating those safe, quiet conditions that the monastery offered our monks who did all that reading and writing and transcribing for us. But we don't need to do it hours a day, but 10, 15 minutes a day is really good.
That's good. Okay. I'm going to do it. And then we should probably wrap up now or we're going to have a whole nother episode if we keep going on tangents. But I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Where can our listeners find you? Where do you like to hang out most on the interwebs?
On the interwebs. Yeah. Where can you scroll and find me?
After you're done reading.
After you're done reading. Yeah, that's right. So raisingcriticalthinkers.com is where you can find the book and a free book club guide. So like you can download this PDF and read the book in community, which I'm really into, so that you have some big juicy conversations around the ideas. Then if you're interested in instruction for your kids in the area of writing, I have a company called bravewriter.com. And that's where we've got online classes and homeschool materials or supplemental school materials if you're interested in supporting that journey. And then finally, I hang out the most personally on Twitter, which is at BraveWriter, or Instagram, and that account is at Julie BraveWriter. So any of those, happy to see you.
And we will put all that in the show notes also. Thank you very much, Julie.
Thanks for having me, Debbie. This was a great, fun conversation.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our show. If you enjoyed what you heard, feel free to subscribe and leave us a review. If you didn't enjoy what you heard, reach out to us and let us know how we can make it better. This show really is about all of us, not just me and my guests, but how we can all work together to make the world just a little bit better. And if you'd like to connect with us in other ways, be sure to follow us on Instagram. We also have a free Facebook group where our fans of the show can connect and discuss their favorite episodes. And in addition to that, we have a membership platform, The Collective by New World Normal, where you will participate in monthly workshops, pop-up challenges, and weekly meetings to support a more intentional lifestyle. We have meaningful conversations about important topics, all in a space that is safe, supportive, and encouraging. So join us. And if you'd like to show us some more support, check out our intentional apparel shop online, New World Intentions. You'll find t-shirts, hats, totes, all with positive messaging to help you move more mindfully through your day and help you to create that new world normal. You can also check out our affiliate page, where you'll find our favorite eco-friendly household and personal care products. Thanks again for listening. Hope you enjoyed that show. I really enjoyed the conversation with Julie and especially appreciated her insights on confronting our own biases and being able to change our mind when being presented with new information. I feel like that's very important and timely for what we experience on a day-to-day basis, especially in social media. So thanks again for listening. Please, please, please go find Julie in all the places and follow her, show her some love, and hope to see you back in a couple weeks for our next new episode.